Shalom. So, of course, Grizz shows up with a what? So while I was traveling, I thought about a lot of stuff, and one of the things I think hopefully this little corner of the internet can kind of agree on is there seems to be a sort of super saturated desire for something, some social cohesion that is new. And I've been trying to kind of consider seed crystals that can be thrown in to help create that crystalline structure. So this video is actually from YouTube. You can go see it there, but it's super saturated. Here, I'll just play it.
Okay, just really quick, I'm going to add one tiny seed crystal. I'm not sure if you can see on the tip of that scoopula there. Right at the tip, we're going to add that to my supersaturated solution of sodium acetate. And we will see it go from a supersaturated state to a saturated state in just a few seconds. Isn't that cool? So we see that the sodium and acetate ions recognize the crystalline structure of that seed crystal I just added, and they add to it, and we form one big crystal. Now when I tilt this to the side, you can see it looks like a big chunk of ice, doesn't it? So now we're back. There's a little bit of water in there. You might be able to see it, but we're back to our saturated state right now. So we've gone from supersaturated to saturated in just a couple of seconds.
So my hope is that possibly some sort of small crystal will actually help this corner of the internet crystallize a bit, become more connected. And one of the things I did is start that podcast, I guess you would call it, on Spotify called Platonic. Another thing is I've started using the word post-Platonic, and I decided, despite the fact that it's not going to work to discuss post-Platonism just propositionally, that we actually do need to also discuss it propositionally. So where did I get this word post-Platonic from? John Vervaeke, I actually forget where exactly he was talking, but he considers himself a Neoplatonist, and he talked about the necessity to form a post-nominalist Neoplatonism. And we're going to talk about that, right? What a post-nominalist Neoplatonism would be. But in order to start off, I think there's a lot of things we need to discuss. And my hope is that maybe this series, in addition to talking to people, will help make that happen. So Ardlian says crystallization. I guess you could say that, yes. And so hopefully together we can come up with some sort of seed structure that can expand, and this is one of those things, hopefully. So John Vervaeke is a cognitive scientist, and one of the things he talks about, I believe it's his innovation in cognitive science and cognitive psychology, is that there are 4 P's of knowing, he calls them. There's the participatory, perspectival, procedural, and propositional. And honestly, we don't tend to talk about the participatory and perspectival much, partially because it's not something you really can talk about. The procedural you can talk about more, but it's still not something that is easy to talk about. So the classic example is, how do you tie your shoelaces? Well, you can try to propositionally explain how to tie your shoelaces in all sorts of ways and make all sorts of diagrams, but ultimately the easiest way is to actually show somebody how to tie their shoelaces. And there is, in this little corner, sometimes people talk about the parabolic, which I think really they mean mimetic, which kind of, I think, encompasses all 4 of them. But by parabolic, they mean a parable as in a story. And when you talk about when you tell a story about the life of someone or even a fictional person, it's not exactly propositional, but it's not, in some ways, I would say it's all 4, right? And so there are people who want to talk about the parabolic in this little corner. But in this series, I'm going to try to actually be propositional and by propositional, we mean talking about things in a logical, verbal manner, right? So proposition is, you are now watching this stream, right? That is a proposition. And what part of the problem has been is that we are so focused on the propositional, and I mean, you can look in further into this little corner, including the work of Ian McGilchrist, to see part of the problem of being too propositional. At the same time, I thought, you know what, we still have to be propositional, and that's why I am starting this series, and I am going to try to talk about the post-Platonic in a propositional manner in this series, whereas in other things, I try to be actually more post-Platonic, which means less emphasis on the propositional. Okay, so how did John Vervaeke end up being a part of this little corner of the internet, which is actually very much theological, and to some extent focused on, not focused on, but involved with the culture war and everything that's going on with our society. Well, cognitive science and the term cognitive psychology, I believe, is resident to the University of Toronto, where he and Jordan Peterson teach/taught. And this whole field of endeavor came about because once we tried to get computers to do what human beings do, it became very, very clear that human beings do a lot of things that we are not aware of. And so in the attempt of programming a computer to do the type of thinking that a human being does, cognitive science developed as a sort of mixture of engineering, computer technology, philosophy, psychology, neuroscience, and really, I would say it started to make clear the necessity for theology, and that's something that we're going to have to talk a lot about. And really, this corner of the internet um, talks a lot about, and how exactly we as human beings relate to the world. Now, one of the trite things that people say a lot is think for yourself. Well, there's a problem with think for yourself. You can't think for yourself. That's impossible. An individual human being has no capacity to survive in any way. You will lose your mind. There's a reason why solitary and isolation is one of the worst punishments that we can inflict on a person, and it is, in fact, psychological torture. And this is one of the things that cognitive science made clear. Does that mean that then we talk about, then we have to believe in appeals to authority? No, of course not. What it does mean is that there is a distributed cognition. And one of the ways I like to point out how our thinking is limited is consider yourself as if you were a computer with an upload and a download rate and memory and processing speed, right? So how fast can you take in information? How fast can you export information? How fast can you process information? And how much information can you retain, right? When you realize the limits of that, it becomes a lot easier to actually understand that the concept of think for yourself is ridiculous. And so we have a distributed cognition. We think in groups. And really what we have to do is figure out how to do that well. One of the problems is Dunning-Kruger and imposter syndrome, which really just refers to the difference between actual ability and perceived ability, right? So which we're going to talk a lot about, is there is a disconnect between the objective and the subjective, how the world actually is and how we think that it is. And one of the biggest problems, Dunning-Kruger, is that the people who have the lowest IQ tend to be most confident even when they're wrong. And people who are actually very, very smart because of imposter syndrome will defer to people who know less. The number one thing I can say is actually take an IQ test, see what your mental capacity is, and live according to that. I'm sorry, if your IQ is below 100, and half the people by definition have lower than 100 IQ, participating in this discussion is probably not going to be fruitful for you or for anybody else. I'm actually a lot smarter than most people. I'm sorry, that's just a fact. And it's been proven over and over again through IQ tests. And I'm nowhere as smart as most of the people who are actually contributing well to this conversation. John Vervaeke, for example, as one example, but many, many other people are much, much, much smarter than me, to the point where I sometimes can't follow what they're saying. And that's fine. I have to understand that. Ardleen says, fast computers still get malware, though. Yes, and that is definitely a problem. At the same time, you're never going to actually include a computer with basically a worthless processor in your computer network. And this is something people just have to accept, that we have our limitations. We all do. And pick an IQ test, and if you're not scoring over 100, please just sit down. And if you are very, very smart, intellectual humility is actually still very useful. At the same time, there is a problem of being too humble. Anyway, to continue where we are with this. So this idea of distributed cognition, where we as people think along with other people. We use the information that other people have, and we develop a capacity to actually function in the world. And honestly, I mean, when you first think about it, you jump in as a child by mimicking your parents in ways that we really don't understand that well. But over certainly the past 5,000 years, but just even over the past 50, 100, 200, 500 years, we have spent a lot of time and effort trying to gain in actual knowledge and information. And part of the problem of the think for yourself mentality is the fact that if you're not standing on the shoulders of giants, if you are constantly reinventing the wheel, then you are not good for anything, right? And part of the problem is that because of the corruption in our distributed cognition, in what's going on in society, a lot of us have experienced the incompetence where we go to what we think is an expert source and we see obvious problems with what is going on. That is an indication of a problem, right? No matter how smart I am, I should not be able to, without training, walk into any field that is seriously being studied and find obvious faults. And so when I go to the computer, when I go to a doctor, right, and I come home, when I Google whatever the doctor told me, yes, I'll gain some information, but it should be obvious that a competent doctor has so much more information that I would have to actually spend years and years and years studying, and in order to even attempt to second guess a competent doctor. And part of what's happened is because of the corruption we see. I give this example a lot, and unfortunately, the friend that I talk about, I think, really misunderstands the point. But I have a good friend who is a research scientist with a PhD from one of the top universities in the United States and, of course, the world, who is doing top level research in top level science. And in talking to him, I mentioned confidence that part of my problem with climate science, which is not something that he deals with at all, is that when I look at the studies and projections, I see no confidence intervals. Well, the type of, he does a lab work, and he doesn't do quantitative analysis and stuff. So making a confidence interval, checking confidence intervals isn't actually a part of what he does on a daily basis. And he said, what is a confidence interval? Well, somebody who has a PhD from any field should actually know enough about statistics to know what a confidence interval is. And that is not my friend failing to know something because it is his personal failure. That is a systematic failure, right? That we don't actually talk about confidence intervals enough. There's a lot of things like this where our distributed cognition is so warped that we end up with our little corner of the internet being worried about it. Okay, not to lose the thing too much. So it's the first caveat I want to make in this discussion is all models are wrong, some are useful. If you take nothing else away from this video, all models are wrong, some are useful. And this is something we talk about a lot in this little corner of the internet. Obviously, I am sure you have noticed there are ways of fooling your senses, right? So the famous dress that some people saw in one color, some people saw in another. There's all kinds of visual tricks. So you can see that what we perceive is not exactly how the world exists. Not going to get into quantum mechanics and all that, but there is a real difference between the subjective, that which is our understanding, and what actually exists. And when those two things don't line up, that's really when people talk about red pilling. I think they're really talking about the institutional betrayal that a person feels when they see that their distributed cognition, what they depended on, what the institutions of social sense making that we have, the model that we were given is not useful, is not giving the predictions accurately as it should. That doesn't mean that we cannot use models, we should not use models. In fact, it's not possible not to use models. One of the ways of realizing that is to look at a map as opposed to territory, right? How useful would a map be if it showed you the exact territory that you're looking at? It would be completely useless, right? Part of the reason we use maps is that they have less information than our senses, okay? And one of the things that we've learned from cognitive science and trying to program computers is that there is a combinatorial explosion there of facts, of information, right? I'm going to give a more detailed example as we go on, but we have to determine from all the various facts that are available to us what is useful, what is not. And our memory does not work like a videotape, right? You don't have exact memories. Your memories can be changed. The model in your mind is imperfect, and it is something that you update even of your memories every time you talk about it. Another reason that the model, all models are wrong, is because you have to determine the level of analysis that you're looking at, right? How closely are you looking at the trees? Are you looking at the leaves? Are you looking at the forest? When I look at a map of Los Angeles, am I looking at a street map? Am I looking at a map of the entire globe? Am I looking at a map of the United States? The level of analysis really matters. And we automatically switch from level of analysis to level of analysis quickly without really realizing what we are doing. Another reason all models are wrong, we have our biases and our necessary prejudices. Because guess what? Without biases and prejudices, you're not going to be able to process the information at all, because there's too much information out there. And finally, part of what I am most concerned about is that we do have corruption and power in our knowledge. And there are people who are dishonest for particular reasons. That is also distorting the models that we have. That doesn't mean there's no such thing as a useful model. We need useful models. So one example I wanted to give of this, all models are wrong, some are useful. When we're talking about the Earth moving around the sun. Now, this is one of the classical, supposedly science being held down by religion. There, Richard Dawkins was having a discussion with Jordan Peterson, and his go-to fact is that the Earth revolves around the sun, goes around the sun. All models are wrong, even a model like that. And Jordan Peterson agreed with him. Why? Because in that conversation, it was useful. At that level of analysis, it was useful. But it's not actually absolutely true. First of all, because all motion is relative. So when we say the Earth goes around the sun, right? All motion is relative. That's not how motion works. But our language, that is how our language works. And so at a different level of analysis, when we look at it further, what someone who, especially of a scientific bent, will say is, hey, the gravity of the sun is affecting the Earth. The gravity of the Earth doesn't affect the sun. That's what we mean when we say that the Earth goes around the sun, right? Sun affects the orbit of the Earth. The Earth does not affect the orbit of the sun very much in any real sense, right? Why? Because the sun is much, much, much larger than the Earth. But when you look at a model like this, that's not, the Earth and the sun are in no way that that relationship to each other. But in order to have a useful model, we use what is useful, right? And the real fact of the matter is, when we're talking about what's going on, the rotation of the Earth itself is actually what we're focusing on when we talk about the sun going around the earth or the earth going around the sun. We're not really talking about the orbit of the sun, of the earth around the sun at all. And so this is probably the place in the Bible that is most relevant here. In Joshua chapter 10, this is the King James Version. Then spake Joshua to the Lord in the day when the Lord delivered up the Amorites before the children of Israel. And he said in the sight of Israel, Sun, stand thou still upon Gibeon, and thou moon in the valley of Ayalon. And the sun stood still, and the moon stayed, until the people had avenged themselves upon their enemies. Is not this written in the book of Yashar? So the sun stood still in the midst of heaven, and hasted not to go down about a whole day. Well, when you're talking about interpreting as human beings what possibly may have happened there, right? One way of looking at that model and saying, hey, the earth, the Bible is wrong when it talks about scientific facts. It's to say the earth goes around the sun, right? The sun isn't really moving in relation to the earth. But really, when it's talking about the sun stood still, right? It's actually talking about the rotation of the earth on its own axis, right? And so when we have a discussion about these things, we have to be talking at different levels. And even someone like Richard Dawkins, who as an atheist is trying to say, he was trying to say the most basic fact he could. He said, the earth goes around the sun. Well, no, it doesn't. The earth rotates on its axis. That's what makes it seem to us that the sun rises and the sun sets, right? And really, when he was talking about the earth going around the sun, he was talking about the influence of the sun's gravity on the earth, as opposed to the earth's not having a gravitational pull on the sun. So if the Bible had said precisely the words that Richard Dawkins had said, right? What would his reaction as a critical atheist have been? Gets its science wrong, right? Okay. I hope it's clear why I'm talking about all models are wrong, but some are useful, because these criticisms of any model are a way of so let me see if I'm actually getting through to people. Phenomenally, the sun would have been experienced by people as if it stood still. So if it isn't untrue to say the sun that the sun stood still, if the earth stopped rotating on its axis, which may have been the miracle, right? But when we are talking about anything, right? Even Stephen Hawking, not Stephen Hawking's, Richard Dawkins, when he was trying to give the most basic facts, right? You could still criticize the manner in which he communicated those facts, because in order to speak to each other, in order to communicate with each other, we have to use imperfect models, right? We have to say things so that we can understand each other. And when it's necessary to be more specific, clarify the level of analysis, clarify the precise thing that we're talking about, right? And some people will, my bad, phenomenologically was the word. Yes, I was wondering what you were saying. By the way, hello, Sir Dabs a lot. I'm not sure if you've been here before. I just wanted to make clear that when we're talking about things propositionally, we are going to necessarily use models. All those models are going to be wrong. And that is the postmodernist critique, which has, for some people, absolutely destroyed their way of looking at the world. That should not stop you from actually being able to live in the world. Some models are useful. And one of the examples I like to give is between Euclidean and non-Euclidean geometry. So Euclidean geometry is when you assume that the shortest line, well, welcome. I'm glad you were recommended my stream. I hope you like it. Empiricism is cringe anyway. I disagree. I think empiricism is necessary, but it is only one form of epistemology, and being scientistic is a problem. So when we talk about Euclidean geometry, the assumption of Euclidean geometry is that, although apparently there are new assumptions and new ways of describing it, but how I was taught, the shortest distance between 2 points is assumed to be a straight line, whereas in non-Euclidean geometries, one of them is the shortest distance between any 2 points is an arc on a great sphere. Well, how would that be useful when you're trying to navigate the Earth or any other sphere like the Earth, right? And you're talking about distances that are actually far enough that the curvature of the Earth is going to affect what you're doing, right? Such as trying to fly from the United States to Europe or to China or whatever, right? Then calculating things, looking at things with other geometries like non-Euclidean geometries is useful. So you can't say that non-Euclidean spherical geometry is wrong. Yeah, it is wrong, but it isn't. It is useful as a model that we can use based in non-Euclidean build. Yes. Okay. I hope that helped explain some things worthwhile. So what happens when you realize that, in fact, all models are wrong? You end up, and that some are useful, you end up possibly with this place where you may be nihilistic or or a pragmatist. Are you trying to tell me the Earth is flat? I am not trying to tell you the Earth is flat. I am trying to tell you that a flat Earth map can be useful, even though it is obviously wrong, as is a spherical look at the Earth. I mean, the Earth also isn't perfectly spherical, right? And while I don't know the exact curvature, I can guarantee you it is not a perfect sphere, because part of the fact is of a hypostasis of the world in which we live in is that we have this ideal in our minds, and it does not match perfectly with the physical reality in the world. Okay, so pragmatism and nihilism. I actually got into a debate with a person where my position is that literally nothing is flat, and flatness is purely a social construct. Sir Dabs a lot. Well, welcome to this corner of the internet. You're going to be very, very welcome here. I think. So, if all models are wrong and some are useful, and we're just using the useful ones, does that mean we are reduced to nihilism or pragmatism? Nihilism being the idea that, F it, all models are wrong, why do I bother? Or pragmatism saying, well, if it's all about what is useful, then why don't I just pick that which is useful? A story that John Vervaeke tells a lot. He starts off his classes by positing a hypothetical. Let's say that your significant other cheated on you, and that person is completely repentant, will never, ever, ever do it again. But knowing about that affair would cause you to break up. Do you want to know? And basically everybody says they want to know, even though part of the hypothetical is that there is no utilitarian purpose to it. Well, why do we want to know? Why does it matter to us that what is real is real? If we're taking either the postmodernist social construct view where it doesn't matter, or we're taking a completely pragmatic view where it doesn't matter, why look at things objectively? Why do you want to know the truth? The existentialists would say that it's just because that's the way it is, and certain people have tried to explain it that way. I think that really the reason why we all want to know the truth is survivor bias. The people who didn't want to know are dead. My example is the Shakers, who believed that they should not have sex and not procreate. Guess what? There are no more Shakers. Why? Because they did not have a view of the world that corresponded with reality and allowed them to continue in their existence. Okay? So a model like the Shakers is going to, in fact, self-destruct, as it has. And what we have, which includes a desire to know the truth, is because it is what has allowed us to exist where we are now. I hope all of that was clear. Now, talking about post-Platonism and what we mean by Neoplatonism, nominalism, postmodernity. So there was Plato, right? And he was an actual person. Like Mormonism must be correct because one man can take infinite wives. Okay, that's a whole other discussion. I've actually been digging into the LDS a lot lately because of stuff. Anyway, so Plato was a person, and he, because of his contribution to Western thought, what happened was that today we look back at people who thought that they were presenting Plato's ideas, even though we can tell that obviously Plato didn't have the ideas of the Neoplatonists, which Plotinus, Augustine, then into Avicenna, Maimonides, and Aquinas. Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, and basically all of the Abrahamic faiths are the descendants of Neoplatonism. None of these people called themselves Neoplatonists, but they assumed that they were integrating Plato's idea into one model of understanding the world. And that was basically the presumption that everybody had, that you took Plato's ideas, including his ideas of universals, right? So I am sitting in a chair. There is a concept, a universal chair, which Plato really believed was a real thing that existed in a kind of spirit world. And that the chair I'm sitting in is a hypostasis of that chair, right? That universal chair. Why are there so many Christians, Jews, and Muslims that vehemently deny that Neoplatonism is part of their religion? Part of it is because they've never heard of it. Part of it is because they Neoplatonism has in fact been used by some people to identify those parts of their religion that they consider to be heretical, right? So, for example, like Sam says, he assumed that Neoplatonism is what introduced the Trinity into Christianity, and therefore he identified what he considered to be heretical with Neoplatonism. I have heard people tell me that Neoplatonism has been declared a heresy by the Catholic Church. I actually read, I believe it was a Catholic encyclopedia from many years ago, which identified the heretical parts, what was considered heretical parts of scholasticism, as Neoplatonic. I've heard lots of people say that Neoplatonism is that which is heretical in their theology and what they don't like, and that's why they tend to be hostile to it, especially the people who would like to get back to pure revelation and believe that any sort of philosophical entanglement with their religion is corrupting it, will often be very will be hostile to Greek influence, including Muslims, Christians, and Jews. So that's why. What is meant by hypostasis? Hypostasis is a particular instance of a universal. I hope I am saying that correctly. I am going to, in fact, look it up to make sure that I am not misstating. hypostasis philosophy, an underlying reality or substance, as opposed to attributes or that which lacks substance. Okay, I'm not sure. So this is from where? This is from, I don't know where Google's getting it, from dictionary.com, I guess. Theology in Trinitarian doctrine, each of the three persons of the Trinity as contrasted with the unity of the Godhead. So the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit are each a hypostasis or hypostasis of the essence that is God. But basically, we're talking about a particular instance of a universal ideal, right? So there is the concept of a chair. The chair I'm sitting on is a hypostasis of chair. The chair you're sitting on, if you are sitting, is a hypostasis of chair. The table my computer's on is there is an idea of table, then there's the table that I am using right now, or you are using, or you have in whatever room you're in. And you have multiple tables. Each one is a hypostasis of that concept of table or chair or whatever. Okay, I hope that's clear. Okay, so there were Plato's actual ideas. Then there was Neoplatonism, which was hypostasis usually is used to refer to as a person in orthodoxy. So as a person of God. Ousia is purely the essence. Hypostasis is the complete organism that is formed by the fabric that is ousia. Right. So in lowercase o, Christian orthodoxy, Trinitarianism, each of them, there are three canonical hypostases of God, right, of the Godhead, which, while all being God, each one of the three is a person, and Trinitarians use the word person weirdly, right, three divine persons, right, and by person they really, I mean, I think you can call them avatars, in a sense. And so Trinitarians have three canonical avatars of godliness, which are the Father, the Son, and the Holy third wheel, as I like to call it. I think it is a fundamental mistake to talk about a person of God as God himself, because the burning bush, for example, is a person of God, is a hypostasis, right? Because it was God manifesting towards for Moses, and so but I think it's a mistake to say that the burning bush was God. Very nice to have you. Thank you. Please like and subscribe, people. No, we don't have avatars. That implies modalism. I'm sorry. I think the Trinity is polytheism. Sorry, not sorry. Okay, so then we had Neoplatonism. This live stream was just featured in my live stream because I'm a meta. Yes, you are. Then why do people worship the messenger of the Lord? If they worship the messenger of the Lord, they are making a profound mistake, which the Bible tells them not to do. Okay, so we had Neoplatonism, which basically was all of Western philosophy. And then we had nominalism and modernity come in, and so nominalism means only in name. Yes, Grizz is correct. Any question that starts with "why do people" equals fallen, and that is exactly why. That is precisely why. Anyway, so nominalism and modernity came with a rejection of the spiritual world, of the these ideals having any sort of actuality. And if you really want a high level modern understanding of what is going on when we talk about the interaction between nominalism and Neoplatonism, on Unbelievable, William Lane Craig was speaking with Sir Roger Penrose. Can you recommend any resources on Neoplatonism? I cannot, and I will explain in a minute why. And if so, Sir Roger Penrose recently won the Nobel Prize in Physics. He is considered one of the top theoretical physicists in the world, alive, certainly alive today. And so his discussion with theologian William Lane Craig was incredibly interesting, maybe above most people's heads, but they were not talking nonsense. And I really believe that had Richard Dawkins been listening to that discussion, his mind would have been blown, as would many people who consider themselves scientists, because part of the reason this corner of the internet exists is that science has debunked modernity in more than one way. Materialism and nominalism really, I mean, so this is why John Vervaeke said we need a post-nominalist Neoplatonism, because nominalism had a point and valid criticisms, as do the postmodernists have valid criticisms of modernity. The problem is that all of these criticisms, unlike Neoplatonism, which was an attempt to synthesize all knowledge together, really nominalism, I would say, was a critique, and certainly postmodernism is again criticism and deconstruction of something else, and that's why we need an actual story. Now, to say why I don't have any good sources on Neoplatonism, partially because nobody ever called themselves a Neoplatonist, including Plotinus, who is considered the father of Neoplatonism. But partially because in order to be truly Neoplatonic, it required integrating with the rest of your knowledge in an embodied and aesthetically coherent way. And that's why when we talk about Neoplatonism, we always tend to be talking about individual versions of Neoplatonism. Neoplatonism, I would compare to a kind of universal that has hypostases itself. And I personally believe that Judaism is the correct version of Neoplatonism, and that Judaism is correct, right? But in order to be post-Platonic, and part of the reason I didn't want to be necessarily propositional myself when talking about post-Platonism was because I did not want to I did not want to be a to force my particular version in onto this little corner of the internet, because I don't think, I mean, almost everybody else is Christian. There are very few Jews, and so probably the version of post-Platonism that we would get in our corner of the internet is going to be a Christian one. And I think that's part of the reason why Eastern Orthodoxy is so popular in this low corner of the internet. So Sir Dabs a lot. The messenger of the Lord identifies as God. Okay, this is a discussion we have a lot in this little corner of the internet. And you said that you are not on Discord. Come on Discord. I certainly have a lot of other videos. I don't want to get into a whole thing of the Trinity. The Trinity and all of that is a huge part of this little corner of the internet. I have several videos you may be interested in, and as do many other people. And yes, Discord is probably the best way of getting involved in this this corner of the internet. Where on the Discord are your references list? I don't believe I have one on my I may have a references thing on my Discord, but you could do it on your Discord, Grim. You know, took too long to type. Was restating the one above yours, Dabs. Yeah, you were talking about Dominic's. Yeah, as far as resources, unfortunately, I don't think there is enough. Wait, do you affirm Kabbalah? Because Kabbalah is extremely Platonic. So I am told that the Kabbalah is Neoplatonic, and that's really why I am so favorably disposed towards we don't have to get in a mess. I'll watch your other videos. And Father Stephen says hi. You're not Father Stephen, are you? If you're Father Stephen, I am a huge fan of Father Stephen, even though I disagree with him a lot. On Sam's, when he went on Sam's channel, he mentioned me, and I have that clipped. And the clip is named Senpai Notices Me, and I show it with great pride to people. So as far as the Kabbalah, yes, I do like pretty much all Orthodox Jews do affirm the teachings of the Arizal. I'm his spiritual son. Well, it's very nice to meet a spiritual son of Father Stephen. He is very popular in this little corner of the internet. Okay, so back to our discussion of post-Platonism. So post-Platonism, I shortened the term from Post-Nominalist Neo-Platonism because I think we needed a way of discussing this. And that's why I created the podcast on Spotify, which I highly recommend to everyone, including Grim, who's supposed to be making the episode that was supposed to come out yesterday. Anyway, okay. So yeah, I'm trying to popularize the term post-Platonism or post-Platonic for what is going on in this little corner of the internet. Okay, so when we talk about philosophy, we are propositionally, obviously, talking about ontology, epistemology, metaphysics, but all of that does end up coming into theology. Ontology is the study of being and how things are. Epistemology is the study of learning and how we learn. Metaphysics is people will disagree with me. But I would define metaphysics as basically the philosophy behind science and scientific knowledge. But I mean, okay, these important fields of philosophy end up standing upon theology, and that's why even people who have started from a completely materialist and scientific view of the world have arrived in this little corner of the internet where we do talk so much about the Trinity and theology. So when we are trying to develop our philosophy, we need to have axioms, presuppositions, and a values hierarchy. Axioms are things which ultimately you just have to affirm or not. And that's why we end up talking about faith, right? Because at some point you can no longer just rely on phenomenology. It's what exists cannot be your basis for what you think should be. It cannot be the reason why you get up in the morning. That would end up with either nihilism or pragmatism or all of the things that we talked about. And so theology provides you with those axioms, those presuppositions, and the values hierarchy you need in order to actually relate to the philosophical underpinnings of everything else we are talking about, and in order to live your life. This is why, in a very real sense, I would say that it is theology is the operating system of the human being, if we're going to make the analogy to computers. So Dabsla, I am Orthodox Christian. I'm not the mean kind. My man here seems to be a cool dude, and I can respectfully disagree and still like him as a person. We have a lot of Eastern Orthodox here in this little corner of the internet. Orthodox Christianity is Chad. Well, except for the polytheism. Although I do have to say that the monarchical Trinity, I don't believe qualifies as idolatry for Gentiles. And so I very much endorse Christians affirming the monarchical as opposed to the egalitarian Trinity. It is one step forward from the absolute polytheism that I think the egalitarian Trinity is. When we talk about theology, though, we have to take into consideration things that are not merely propositional. I know you're kidding, Dominic. I hope you're kidding. We have to save Jacob from the synagogue of Satan. Last I checked, you still hadn't become Orthodox, although it's been a while. I hope things are well. Okay. Embodiment, aesthetics, credibility, that wanting to know that what you are talking about is true, and community, which ends us with dialogos and actually chatting, actually talking about things and helping build what we are, who we are here. These things are not merely propositional and that's why post-Platonism ultimately cannot be propositional. But because the propositional is so involved in all of that, that's why I decided to try to make this series, and hopefully this will be the start of a discussion going forward, and there will be other post-Platonic propositions, and that's why I called this one. Now, when we talk about the one, which is an important part of post-Platonism and Neoplatonism, monotheistic religion, in some ways I wanted to help define that, but honestly I think we need more of a conversation. So I am going to leave you with the same thing that I end my post-Platonic podcasts with, is the my version of the Serenity Prayer. May the one grant us the strength to change that which we can, the grace to accept that which we cannot, and the wisdom to know the difference. Now, obviously, if you are going to take this apart propositionally, the question becomes, why do you want to change? What do you want to change? What requires grace for you to accept? Why are you unhappy with certain things, even though you cannot change them? And what exactly is wisdom? And the one giving to us strength, grace, and wisdom. All of these things are a huge further discussion that we need to have, but this is my presentation for today. It was slightly over an hour, including the discussion. I am going to stick around if people want to discuss this or other things for a while. So please put whatever you want to discuss into the chat. And if you want to discuss the Trinity, I suppose we can, although the Trinity isn't often discussed. If you have not watched Father Stephen on Transfigured, which is Sam's channel, I highly recommend it, and that might be a first thing you may want to discuss. Otherwise, I am here for discussing whatever you guys would like. Anybody who knows me who would like to come on the stream, please feel to DM me. I am going to put a link to my Discord server somewhere so people can, in fact, join my Discord. If anybody wants to come on, please do DM me. Otherwise, I'm going to check my messages. Do you think Neoplatonism predates Hellenism, or that it really did start with Plotinus? So when Paul Vanderklay was on Sam's channel with um, John Vervaeke, they discussed my little leak theory of Neoplatonism, which has a lot more to commend it than similar theories among the Sufis and I guess Christians as well, which is that I think really what happened was that Jewish esoteric knowledge leaked into both even Plato. Ultimately, when we talk about the Greek alphabet, it does come from the Paleo Hebrew alphabet, the Phoenician alphabet, whatever you want to call it. So that tells us that at the very beginning stages of writing, there was an intellectual interchange between Hebrew and Greek. Therefore, I date the contact between Hebrew ideas and Greek ideas to before any Greek writing. And therefore, I think basically anything resembling Kabbalah and Jewish mysticism, which shows up in Platonic, Middle Platonic, which includes Philo of Alexandria, who obviously was Jewish, and then Neoplatonism, all derives from Judaism and Jewish revelation, ultimately. And while John Vervaeke found that amusing and compared it to the Sufis saying similar things, that the Plotinus got everything from Islam and how Islam was originally taught, and that Sufism comes before. I think I have a much better case when we talk about Judaism to say that Plotinus uh, basically was repackaging esoteric Jewish ideas, which leaked out, and that's what Sam calls my Kabbalistic lab theory, lab leak theory, and I I think that's a good way of describing it. So. Do I like Philo? Um, I don't consider him a religious source. I don't know if I like him more or less than Josephus. I mean, these are two people who um, made it big in the world and are better known outside Jewish circles than Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai or Rabbi Meir or Rabbi Akiva, and in some circles are more studied than the Jewish Bible. Um, I'm not sure that's something I like. I certainly don't think of Josephus or Philo as religious authorities, but um, they obviously made valuable contributions to human knowledge since they are so widely discussed. Actual translations, I mean, I'm not a huge fan of, but I use the Stone Tanakh. So Art Scroll's newest translation, Art Scroll does a pretty good job. Chabad's, I mean, and Safaria has one, has a few, like the Mitsuda, but honestly, I just don't believe in translating the Bible. So Hey, Roman, how you doing? So we're talking about how all models have to be based in practicality. I'm not sure I would say that. I say all models are wrong. Some are useful because reality exists. In order to live within reality, we have to work within it. And so we use models and we need to use models. And the fact that the models are all wrong does not mean that they are all equal. I think that was the main point I was trying to make. Hey, how the world is. Well, we have to be in the world with as accurate of models as we can, but we can't use perfectly. It's we are incapable of having perfect models. So where does Plato sneak in? So Plato is what basically everybody thought they were integrating into their thoughts. So after Plato, there were Neoplatonists who thought that they were, in fact, interpreting Plato, but the fact is that the stuff that they were saying was so far removed from what Plato himself said that historians of philosophy call that Neoplatonic. Where are the forms? We talked about the universals and forms. Where's the cavern? I did not talk about the cavern. Although I guess we could talk about the cavern because map territory and relation because our brains are smaller than the world. I would say because God is infinite and we are finite. That is how I would term it, but that's my way of doing it. So. Well, I would say that that's the nominalist way of looking at it. Our universal is just a design pattern of models. So nominalism would say that we just recognize patterns. And to some extent, I think Pajot seems to buy into nominalism in too too much. I think there is a reality to those patterns. I think the patterns themselves, and this was kind of the argument that Sam was making to John Vervaeke in their discussions about Neoplatonism, that there actually does exist a pattern, but that's because he is a theist, as am I. And I mean, this gets into really, really. You think universals are part of God's design? Yeah, basically. I mean, I think God is the pattern maker, and um, again, this goes to that discussion that William Lane Craig had with Sir Roger Penrose on Unbelievable, which Ginger, Bill, and Sam tried to make a commentary on Randos United, but unfortunately, they actually, as opposed to making that episode of Unbelievable more understandable, their discussion went higher level than the discussion that Penrose and Craig were having. So Sir Roger, like when you're talking above Sir Roger, like don't expect me to understand it. Like I said, there are much smarter people than me in this little corner of the internet. And Ginger Bill and Sam are two of them. how do you figure out God's design patterns? Good question. Just science. I mean, that's partially the idea of natural law, but no, I don't think it can be just science. I think you can. I mean, I do believe in the ability to look at empirically at the world and discern the hand of the creator in the creation, but um ultimately I believe there is revelation, and I believe in revelation. Maybe certain kinds of very rigorous phenomenology. Yeah, I mean, um that would be personal revelation, but I also believe you can in fact rely on other people's revelation in distributed cognition. So um, I do believe the 5 books of Moses are real, are actual revelation, and part of the reason for that is um, that is where I started, but the more I learn, the more it gets confirmed. So Okay, people, I am going to log off. Talk to you later.